Today we're in London to talk to a man who's been collecting watches for more than 20 years. He's charming, always impeccably dressed, and he's one of London's biggest characters. His name is Ahmed Rahman, and today we're talking watches. Ahmed, welcome to Talking Watches.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Being asked to appear on Talking Watches is really an absolute honor. I'm thrilled to be here.
You've brought a couple of pieces for us today, and you've brought some pieces, the likes of which we haven't really featured on Talking Watches because a lot of them are modern pieces. So what is your first modern piece?
To start it all off with, one of the pieces that actually got me into collecting sort of higher end chronographs was the Nautilus 5980 chronograph. The reason why I bought it is because at that time there was very much a trend of wearing bigger watches, and I was very much into that phase of wearing very big, brash watches. However, having said that, Patek had never brought out a substantially chunky piece, and this was sort of, in many ways, one of the chunkier watches that they produced around, I think it was 2007, 2008. And I was completely enamored by it straight away. One, because it was taking on from a very, very classic design, Gerald Genta's design of the original 3700, and then evolving it into a chronograph with their own in-house movement. And I have to say, it made the watch look really sexy in many ways, and I absolutely loved it.
And there's another Genta icon.
Yes, these two are sort of my ode to Genta, who's, when it came to designing the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, in many ways, a genius. Classic designs from the late 60s, early 70s, which are still going very strong. And the great thing about this watch is that it's a perpetual calendar inside a Royal Oak case, which is, again, very unusual.
It's in a sports watch, and you can take it
And
swimming.
I do, yes, and I do, and absolutely. I mean, the feeling of being able to go swimming wearing a perpetual calendar in your wrist. Can't do that with a lot of perpetual calendars, but you can with that, absolutely.
And so one thing I notice is that your allegiance is not with one particular brand. We've got a lot of brands here. We have the Datograph from Lange, we've got the chronographs from Vacheron, and the 5970G.
Which is a perpetual chrono. And I'm wearing a 5070, so it's quite interesting because 3 of these 4 watches have the same movement, the La Mania. The Datograph obviously has its own. And that's what makes the Datograph very, very special.
And this has a chronograph that Philippe Dufour himself calls the best chronograph, best modern in-house chronograph.
Absolutely. I've always loved the Dato because, one, it's very quintessentially Lange. And I think aesthetically, it's a beautiful dial. It just works. It really does work. And it's a perfect size. This is the first series.
So that's 39 millimeters instead.
That's a 39 millimeter. The 41 came out later on with a sort of up and down indicator at 6 o'clock. But I think in terms of proportion and aesthetics, this watch is almost perfect.
So we've got this lineup of 3 watches that kind of make sense next to each other.
Right.
But then we've got a wild card with the Richelieu.
Yes. So as I've been sort of collecting over a period of time, I've also come to admire watch brands which do something out of the box. That particular watch, the RM35, it feels very simple, but it's not. A lot of thought has gone into it. And I love it because purely because of its remarkable lightness. I wear it a lot, especially when I'm traveling, and it's great because you just don't feel it. I don't even have to take it off while going through security scanners at the airport.
Are you calling this the perfect travel watch?
Almost. For me, actually, the perfect travel watch is the Aquanaut Travel Time. It's a watch you can wear and you don't have to think about it. When you're traveling, you're jet lagged, you can just literally move the pushers and it will do everything for you, including changing the date. That is so important. Now, getting back to vintage watches, I love Rolexes. Vintage Rolexes are great because they're very, very utilitarian watches. They're tool watches. And of course there are things like the Paul Newman version of it and etc. But I think the 6263 for me is in many ways the perfect Daytona.
And so you've got this guy we haven't talked about yet, the Sippe Cartier monopusher, which kind of bridges the gap nicely between vintage design and modern movement, because what people may not realize is that this is a movement that was made by François-Paul Journe,
Vianney Holter and Denis Falcholet.
This really does look like a vintage Cartier watch.
It does, and that was very special, but they adapted it to modern watchmaking and used modern movements, and there's a continuation of the brand, and that's what I love about it.
And so over here we have another classic dress watch, this time from Jaeger-LeCoultre.
This is a tribute. This is the 1931 tribute they brought out, but this is special because this has a painting at the back.
This is by René Magritte.
And I'm a huge René Magritte fan. And subsequently to the purchase of this watch, I was very lucky to have quite recently visited the Jaeger-LeCoultre manufacturer in Switzerland. And I actually saw one of the ladies not doing the painting, but doing a painting on the back of a watch. And it was remarkable to see that, and made my watch that much more interesting and more important to me.
I guess we should talk a little bit about that Patek Philippe that's staring at us, 5970G.
The 5970G.
There are very few out there. You are one of the lucky owners.
I really am very, very lucky. I've always wanted a 5970 because it is, for me, one of the greatest perpetual chronographs and modern Patek Philippe's to come out in the last 20 years. It's a great size, it's an amazing movement, it's a perpetual chrono. Can't go wrong with that.
So this is the white gold and salmon.
This is the white gold and salmon dial 5970G.
And in fact, when we take a look at your collection as a whole, one thing that stands out is that they're all white metals.
Yes, I don't wear any yellow metals. So most of my watches tend to be in steel, white gold or platinum.
And then we've got that guy up there, the ceramic Flieger chronograph.
Yes. IWC is very interesting for me. The Portuguese line for me has always been, design-wise, story-wise, aesthetically, it's just a beautiful watch. And this one is particularly very interesting because it's a split-second chronograph. Following on from that, once you get into IWC Portuguese watches, I think for me the natural follow-up was getting into their pilot's watches. And the great thing about the ceramic Flieger is that it's a chronograph, and it's one of the first ceramic chronographs ever to come out.
IWC pioneered.
IWC pioneered it. That is what makes this watch so special. This is truly one of those watches that was a first. And this watch, in its simplistic form, is sort of very quintessentially Breguet. It's a very, very simple watch, but absolutely love it. If you look at the back, it is pretty special. Very, very well decorated. And I think you've been to the Breguet manufacturer quite recently. I remember reading a report on that. The passion and the dedication that goes into making something like this is just very unique.
So, when you've got a collection that mixes vintage, modern, different types of complications, when you look at this collection, what comes next?
For me, the number one rule of collection is that I must wear them. And I pretty much wear all of them. I don't necessarily look at them as investment. If that happens, then that's a bonus, but that's not why I'm buying the watch. But if I were to look at my collection, maybe something different, something out of the box. It could be a smartwatch because it is something which is very relevant to its time. Maybe a minute repeater. I think each watch has its very unique signature, and that's what makes them very special. I mean, yes, some watches have an amalgamation of complications, which is great. Sometimes a classic time-only watch is just a classic time-only watch, but it's a beautiful watch.